Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest grew up in an alcoholic home where she was the victim of sexual abuse at the hands of her stepfather. And while she managed to escape that world and chart a successful path for herself in television, she still suffered from a persistent sense of victimhood that she treated with alcohol abuse. When a DUI finally forced her to reevaluate her choices and get sober, she reinvented herself completely, dispensing with her old notions of perfection and prioritizing fulfillment. She is now the author of a recent memoir, Chaos to Clarity, Seeing the Signs and Breaking the Cycles, as well as an award-winning TV host and creator of Wake Up with Marci. Won't you please welcome Marci Hopkins.
I'm originally from Houston, Texas.
Nice.
And
Nice.
yeah, my work took me to Denver, then LA, got married, and my husband brought me to New Jersey.
Oh my gosh, which is where we're speaking now. And so as a kid in Houston, what was your kind of life like?
Yeah, so my childhood was not a lot of fun. Be honest. My mother had me very young.
How old was she?
She had got pregnant with me at 18 and had
Right.
me just when she turned 19.
Right.
And so I was kind of being raised by my hippie mom and dad, and they, they were babies themselves. So it was hard for them to take care of a child. So went back and forth to my grandma's a lot, and my family helped to raise me. And then there was an episode where one of the boyfriends beat me because of the situation. And then I moved in with my grandparents for about 7 years. So I was
And
there.
that
Yeah.
boyfriend was one of your mom's boyfriends?
Yeah. Yeah.
So at that point, she had broken up with your dad?
Yeah. So she tried to be with my dad for about a year, my first year of life, and then it didn't work out. So
Right.
yeah.
And I mean, your dad was what were they doing for work? I mean, was your dad a kid as well?
My dad worked on motorcycles.
And was he like 19 when they also?
My dad was early 20s.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So
he hits the road and your mom has boyfriends. And how old are you when this incident happens with one of her boyfriends?
I was 6.
And were they drinking and using? Was that like part of their story?
Yeah. Yeah. My mother, she died of alcoholism. My father was an alcoholic. So yeah, they both had issues with it.
So, and what happened in this incident where you were abused and
so, and this is one of the things I share very openly in my book. I have a book that just came out called Chaos to Clarity. And the book opens up with this story that they had been partying the night before. I'm staying in the guest room at my mom's boyfriend's house. And there was a Tootsie Roll can that was because I'm bored, right? I'm up early, they're sleeping. And so I'm looking around and I find this Tootsie Roll can thinking there's candy in there. And there ended up being coins in there. And I make a decision. I know, I don't even know the value of the money, but I know the silver money is more than at that time, brown money, right? Copper. And so I ended up taking the silver coins. And when my mom's boyfriend walked in, he grabbed this Tootsie Roll can. And the irony of the whole thing is he was going to give that to me as a gift. And he could say, he's like, why is this so much lighter? Where's the money? And I'm saying, I have no idea, because now I know,
right. You've done something wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And he grabbed me, and guy got in a lot of trouble, and he beat me right in front of my mom when she was laying in bed. It was not a very nice episode. Nothing uplifting about that one.
And And then how did you manage as a 7-year-old or 6-year-old to get out of that and into your grandparents' house? Like, what was the sort of series of events that led to that?
So just by chance, we were going to my grandparents that day for a family party. And my mother said, don't tell them what happened, this and that. And then I ended up, I mean, obviously, like, I'm already very upset going into this day and this, with my family. And the boyfriend did something that upset me again. And I ended up showing my grandmother what had happened because my backside was all bruised.
God.
And so they ended up getting kicked out of the party. And my aunts tell me that when they were leaving the house, here I am, this 6-7-year-old, and I stuck my tongue out at my mom. That's how I was dealing with it. But my grandparents ended up saying, if you want to stay here, you can. And
did the police get involved or anything? No.
No.
It was just, and was your mom like, okay, I recognize that I am incapable of being a parent at this point, and I should give up this responsibility to my own parents? Or,
well, so I realized, at that point, I didn't feel safe with my mom, so I made the decision to stay with my grandparents. And remember, I was on the phone with my mother, telling her this, and I'm in complete tears. I'm sobbing over this decision, and she didn't really beg for me to come be with her. So I guess now I understand that she probably realized it was best for me to stay there.
Right.
Yeah, with her lifestyle.
And do you remember wanting her to beg you to come?
Yeah,
home?
Definitely.
That's so hard.
I know.
So hard.
I always wanted her to choose me over a guy, but a guy is what validated my mother.
Sure.
And it was.
And what did what sort of work were your grandparents doing that, were they capable of supporting you and stuff?
Yeah. And there was still, my aunts were still in the house. So
because they're still young. They're probably like my age at this point, or younger. Like,
well, at that point, so when I was born, one of my aunts was only 13 years old.
Right.
Yeah. So very young. My mother was the oldest of 4. And so when I moved into the house, like, they would just kind of going through the whole college thing.
Right.
And,
so that must have been kind of nice for you, actually, to be, in a busy, happy house.
Yeah. So it was good. It was good. I mean, my grandfather drank a lot, and he had anger issues. So there was some really major stuff that happened with the anger. But
like, what kind of stuff? Like just breaking stuff or putting his fist through the wall, that kind of thing?
He would just go into these fits of rage where he just would be like, say GD over and over and over. And I guess one of the worst episodes was my aunts were there, and he'd probably been drinking, and I don't even know what he got so upset about.
Right.
He was raging, and he went into the bedroom and he pulled a gun.
Oh, wow.
And in Houston, you had guns, and my grandfather, he always had a gun. And so I remember in the bedroom, he was in there, and I heard the gun go off, and I was scared for my grandmother, and I had a little dog. I thought he might have shot the dog, but he shot a chair. And so, that was one of those traumatic experiences living there. But I do know that it was best for me in those years from 7 to 13, 12. I was 12 when I left, for me to have been there, because my grandmother's always been my rock and the best source of a mother and a feeling of safety.
And what happened at 12 that you decided to move out?
So my mother got married, and so here she gets married to this guy, and I think he's going to be our knight in shining armor. And we move in, they get married, move in, and which their wedding was the first time I got drunk at my grandmother's house, at 12.
What did you drink?
Champagne.
Right.
Champagne.
Good. Right.
And yeah, I was put to bed, and
Right.
I don't remember getting in trouble or anything for
Right.
it.
Sure.
And anyway, not too long after that, I realized now that I was being groomed, that sexual abuse started with my
Right.
stepfather. Mm-hmm.
How old were you when that started?
12.
12. And I have zero experience with sexual abuse stories, or very little. And so if I ask a question that is dumb or offensive, please forgive me. And so how did it start? Like, what was the sort of, like, do you remember? I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah, the first episode was, he actually took me to the movie Porky's.
My dad took me to Porky's when I must have, I don't know how old I was. I must have been about the same age. But anyway, yeah. So
your stepdad taking you to Porky's, I thought he was so cool at the time. I now realize that it's not really the best thing to be taking your daughter to Porky's. But it was almost like in the same moment. He had his arm around me, big guy. And he had his arm around me, and he had his arm on my knee, like, around my shoulders, on my knee. And I'm thinking to myself at that moment, like, wow, I feel so safe. Like I have a dad, like,
right. Oh.
And then his hand started going up my leg.
Wow.
Yeah. And he tried to touch me, and I got up, raced out of the theater, and I was crying, and it was a pretty bad scene. But as abusers do, then he bought me gifts and let me do things and go on this trip that I wanted to go on, and don't tell your mom. And so now we had this awful secret.
Right. Mm-hmm. What was the trip?
It was a trip to tour Europe with the school.
Oh, nice. Right. Mm-hmm. How was that? Just out of curiosity, was that great?
How was the trip?
Yeah.
So it was good. It was good. I'm glad I went. It was, God, so much traveling. You're on buses.
Right.
And, like, I remember sleeping through the Swiss Alps and all these things. Like, and I wanted to go and explore, whereas everybody else there wanted to go shopping.
Right. Right.
So great. It was a good experience. I'm glad I got to go. And
did your stepfather apologize after that first incident in the
Oh yeah, he was
theater?
So apologetic, never happen again, blah, blah, blah. I don't know why I did it. And then I went on this trip to Europe. And then when we got back, about a week later, we actually ended up going to Hong Kong, Singapore. I went with my mom and my stepdad. And I think I was like 13 at this time, and we were in Hong Kong, and we were all by the pool, and I wanted to go back up and get dressed because we were going to be going to dinner that night. And now I'm 13, and it's so important that I look good. I start caring.
Yeah.
And so I'm in the shower, and the door, like the slats go up. So if you look under, you could actually look into the bathroom.
Sure.
And the shower was right in front, and all glass. And I saw him trying to look at me in the shower.
Right.
And so I jump out, and then when I saw him finally leave, I got back in the shower, and then my mom finally came in, and he asked for us to leave. And I was very angry that we had to go, and I didn't get to finish getting dressed. And it was that my mother and I got in a huge fight. She's literally strangling me in the middle of Hong Kong on these waterways. And I ended up screaming at her, how could you do this and protect a man that's abusing your daughter? And that's
how when he asked you guys to leave, like, what was he saying? Like,
that he needed some time alone, which I can only imagine what he did with that time alone.
Right. Mm-hmm. And are you saying to your mother at that point, he's watching me shower? Like,
well, like I said, in that anger, for strangling me, that's when I was like, how could you be doing this to me when, your husband's doing this to me, and then I explained everything that happened.
And did things escalate from there, or what happens from there?
So I had this feeling that he was doing things to me in my sleep, but I couldn't prove it because I was a really deep sleeper. And
Right.
the only thing I really remember my mother saying is wear more clothes when I slept.
Really? God.
And she did not leave him.
Right.
And so then I started declining. I wanted to kill myself. I was failing in school.
When you're wearing more clothes, I mean, are you finding evidence of his, nighttime stuff?
Well, what finally ended up happening, then there were lots of things that were happening like during the day that I knew, like porn. And if you look like this, on the cover of a dirty magazine, like I'd leave your mother for you. And
right.
all of these
God. I mean, I'm sorry to laugh. Men are just like such pigs.
Yeah. And then finally I woke up and his hand was between my legs. So I knew.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. And how old are you at that point?
At this point, I'm 14.
Right. And so what happens?
The next day, I did go to school. I'm doing terrible in school and everything. And I came home and I was just in such a state. And I ended up telling my mother.
Mm-hmm.
She knew something was wrong. Told my mom. She called a hotline.
Wow.
And then he came home. Obviously, something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I remember she went to the back bedroom, told him about what I had shared. And he told her that I knew what was happening the whole time and I wanted it to happen.
I mean, as though that makes a difference. You're 14.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, what a fucked up defense. Anyway.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So now, I mean, I'm screwed. Like she stays in the marriage because she's just this weak being. And I'm like, I just don't even know what to do. Like that's when I start drinking. Drinking starts escalating.
And do you remember like the first sort of time that you sort of abused alcohol that kind of way?
So it was really just like I started on the weekends drinking. My friends, like we would start experimenting with alcohol and my first time experimenting again when the wedding, I drank too much. Then like I had this girlfriend and we decided she's like, let's raid my parents, liquor cabinet. And I get completely annihilated. And it was just every time I drank, it was with the intention of getting drunk and
Sure.
And also like looking to find attention from boys because
Sure.
Because it kind of like shaped me into this person that used alcohol to cope and also sexuality to cope, because that kind of became my armor to be able, it became a game to me to get guys to like, if I could get you to like me, that would become like the game and I won.
Sure.
Right.
Right. Because you had the power in that situation.
Exactly.
And are you still, do you stay living at home with your mother and stepfather?
Yeah. So we ended up leaving. And when I turned about 15, I don't think it happened anymore. We moved to another part of Houston. I'm now in high school, 10th grade. And it's so interesting because I remember like my life and what I was doing. I had a boyfriend, like all this stuff, going out on the weekends, drinking. But I don't remember like the home life. Like I completely like blocked out the home life. Like I don't even remember like sitting down to dinner with them. Like it was just, I think that I did everything I could to stay out of the house.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then right before my senior year, they finally got a divorce because now they're both alcoholics.
Right.
They're being abusive to one another. So my mother finally had enough. And so my mom and I ended up getting a place in the Woodlands and living together. And then I had to take care of her because now she's a raging alcoholic.
And so do you go to college?
Yeah, but it was hard for me because I didn't have any direction. I didn't know, and the minute I could get out of the house, high school ends. I go into Houston. I start finding my own way, start going to clubs, finding drugs, escaping in a whole nother way.
Right.
And
what drugs were you into?
Ecstasy and cocaine.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Right.
And then I realized, and there's another part in the book, like that moment when you realize, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I gotta stop this. And I remember I was like dating a drug dealer and like all these people around me, my age, we're all doing drugs and everything. And I was walking past the pool and there's a huge window. And I see the reflection of myself and I see my mom and I'm like,
oh, wow.
Holy crap. I mean, I got to get out of here because.
And how old are you at that point?
That point, I must have been like 19.
Right. And are you working?
Yeah. So like I got in the restaurant business. So now I'm working in restaurants and that,
that's its own. I mean, exactly. I've had some people on this podcast who, either they were waitresses or they worked in, catering or whatever it is. And it's, you're basically working to party.
I always said that. You always work to party because you couldn't wait for it to end because then the party started for you.
Yeah. And you sort of party with the people you work with because they're all young and fun and they're all sort of on the same. You're all doing the same thing because the work is not fulfilling really anyway, and it's not really going anywhere. So it's like, well, why are we doing this? We're doing this so that we can, blow off steam. And
and then I started at junior colleges. I mean, I did go to college. I did try to go to college. I tried to get into a better college. And so that was all a nightmare trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. And I just never went to class and, of course, found the party people and, it was another escape. And my grandmother actually put me into this series of tests. Like we found someone to give a series of tests to see what am I good at? What are my interests and that sort of thing. And I ended up at the Art Institute for Music and Video Business. And that started my path in television.
And so let me ask you something. You're walking past this plate glass window by the pool and you see this reflection of yourself and you're like, oh, fuck, I've become my mother. Yeah. What happens then?
I literally pack up my shit and I'm gone.
And where do you go?
I went to my grandma's and then I just started life over again.
And did you get sober at that point?
I just walked away from the drugs and no, I didn't get sober. I mean, I still was drinking and everything, but I knew that I had to get away from the drugs. It was like a year and a half of intense partying.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I had the realization, like, I just cannot do this. I mean, like it was that time where you have the fork in the road and you could either stay on this course where you're going to destroy yourself or you got to start making some changes.
And did you stay not doing drugs?
I did until I, found people that were doing drugs again. And then I did it periodically. I didn't do it so much. So
it wasn't like your reason for living.
No.
And then what happens? I mean, you are sober? Yeah.
Yeah. Now? I'm 7 years sober now.
7 years sober. So that's quite how many years are we talking between giving up ecstasy and coke and actually stopping drinking?
20 years.
20 years. That's about my story too.
25
Very
years.
Similar thing. And what happens in those 20 years?
Well, somehow I made it. somehow,
right. Okay. That's the headline. Definitely.
yeah,
So
yeah.
congrats to
I
you.
mean, I was like, shit. I mean, I was doing so good in work. I mean,
And what kind of work were you doing?
I was working for Fox Cable Group, and
Nice. Based in Houston at that point
I
still?
started in operations,
Mm-hmm.
and then I moved into programming as an assistant. And then actually at that time, my boss ended up having AIDS and he left. I didn't know he had AIDS
Right.
at the time, it's 80s. And so then I ended up having to do his job, and somehow I succeeded, even though I'm drinking every day.
Sure.
But it was just normal. Like, I saw my mom drink every day. I saw my grandfather drink
Sure.
every day. Like, you go home and you have your wine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You work to go home and have your wine. But
Yeah.
um, I ended up getting the job as a manager,
Uh-huh.
programming, and I moved to Colorado. I did the job for about 19 months and got engaged. I was going to get married, and 6 weeks before I was going to get married, I knew that I was in an abusive relationship. It was so bad, my drinking, because I had the cycle like that. I'd make a change, things would start getting better. I'm in love, life's going to be so wonderful, my work and this and that. And then things would start declining. My drinking would elevate. I'd go outside of the relationship to find somebody that would give me the attention I'm looking
Sure.
for and the happiness I'm looking for. So now we're at 6 weeks before I'm going to get married. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, this guy's becoming abusive. I'm drinking excessively. Uh, my whole life, I'm just unhappy. So I ended up getting a job in California through Fox Cable Group, took a step back in my work, sold my house, broke off my engagement, and went to LA.
Right. Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But, and
And,
then I made it. And I said, if I'm going to become a manager, I always had a drive.
right.
Like, I mean, which is interesting, that I
Yeah.
always driven and always succeeded. And I always think now, like, God, how far would I have gone if I weren't drinking?
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And did you stay in that sort of cable business in LA?
Yeah. So I went to LA. I ended up meeting my husband, guy I married 3 months in, and ultimately became the director of on-air promotions for FX Network.
Amazing.
And still to this day, it's like one of those things, right? The imposter syndrome or whatever. Like, how
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
hell
Like, what
did
was
I
I
do
doing?
this? Yeah, how did I do this? And
And
and I was on the road to be VP. Like, it was
right.
crazy.
And
Yeah.
what was your drinking looking like at that point?
Still drink every day.
Right. Where in LA were you living?
When I first moved there, I was living in Beverly Hills adjacent.
Sure.
And then when I met my husband, we started dating. He was living in Manhattan Beach, and I ended up moving with him. Kept my apartment for a while on Olympic Boulevard, and then we ended up
I know
getting.
that stretch of Olympic really well.
Yeah,
Drive through
yeah.
it all the time on my way to work. And so what happens? Like what ultimately makes you decide to get sober, I guess, is really the question I'm
Oh,
asking.
well, so now I'm just in my 30s. So in my 40s, now we're in Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Why'd you guys
And
move to Jersey?
well, I had retired, had our first child.
Right.
He had a job opportunity in New York. He's from New Jersey. So we just ended up coming here, and he
And
got,
how many kids do you have?
at this time, I only have one child.
And how many do you have now?
Two.
Two. And where in
Two.
New Jersey are you guys living? Sorry.
I'm in Bergen County, so we're about 24 miles from New York. And
Right.
so what happened was I ended up going after a lifelong dream of getting in front of the camera.
Nice.
So I, put it out in the universe, and all these people started coming into my life, and I started commercial print and commercial acting, had agents and all of this going into the city. But the problem with somebody like me is I had no self-love, I had no self-confidence, and I'm putting myself in a place where I'm being judged all the time.
Sure.
And also, like, I'm home alone with the kids. My husband's working all the time. I had a lot of resentment. I had a victim mentality. Everything's being done to me, and this roller coaster of a career that I'm choosing. Now I start drinking more because that's my liquid courage. So I start drinking, like, before I go into an audition, when I get home, like, it really started elevating. Now this is a different level of drinking.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So
but I mean, you succeeded in becoming an on-air personality, yes?
Yeah. But that all happened after I quit drinking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what ultimately makes you change? Like, what's the incident?
I was like, I gotta get out of this industry as far as being in front of the camera. Not good for me.
Yeah.
And so I had a guy that I knew that had shot something that I had done here, and he had transformed his garage into a studio. And I'm like, let me find you clients. I know so many people in the industry, and I know so many people in the community. Let me help you.
Right.
So started bringing clients in, and God, that was a whole fiasco. But the seed had been planted about doing a talk show.
Right.
And so I don't know, like, it was just like, now I'm being put on this path, and this idea is in my head. Why can't you do a talk show, Marci? Why can't you be the host of a talk show? And I'm like, holy shit, I've never done anything like this.
Right.
But I went for it. I had my first person I interviewed. I literally had my phone and just put it up and started Facebook Live and started a show called Coffee with Marci, and the thing took off.
How fun.
Yeah. And so I did that for about a year, and I was interviewing entrepreneurs and nonprofits, and I made a business out of it. People, like, I had a huge, big following, and people were paying for me to do this. And I was creating, at this point, I have better cameras, editing pieces together and stuff like that. But then I knew about a year into it, I had met this gentleman that had a streaming network called NJ On Air. And he was a producer and such. And he was telling me about a show he was going to do that was going to go on a network called U2 America. And I was like, you know what? I want to do more. I want to create a show where I'm sharing, like, stories of hardship and triumph to share hope, because now I'm living this incredible life. I've done so much healing. I'm learning to live in a joyous place and spirituality, and I wanted to give that back to people. And that's when, I launched Wake Up.
I missed you getting sober. You got sober in here somewhere?
Yes, I guess we didn't. So we jumped right into the talk show. So I had gone my final day of drinking. I'd gone on a gig, and I ended up drinking a thermos of wine, did my gig, went out with a girlfriend.
And the gig was what?
So I was doing a runway show for a designer at one of the malls.
Right.
And so I wasn't going to drink. I was telling myself, you don't need this. Then I found out I'm at the wrong mall. So now I'm thrown into this chaotic state, trying to get there for my call time.
Right.
Start drinking the wine on the way in the car.
And your job at this gig will be to do what?
Model the clothes.
Walk
the runway.
And so how much do you drink between realizing you're at the wrong mall and
probably half a bottle of wine.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
After? Huh?
And then what happens?
So then I do the show, and
is the show okay?
Of course, I think I do really great, right? I have a lot of fun. But now that I think about it, they didn't call me to do another one. So that probably didn't go so well. But I went out with my girlfriend, and we're drinking martinis. I'm barely eating because I'm drinking. So my calories are coming from my drinking and trying to stay thin. And then I'm going to go home. And she's like, well, let's go have one more. And at this point, I'm not making any rational decisions. And so we go and we have another one. I remember sitting at this restaurant. I'm like, I got to eat something. We order some food, and I guess I go into a blackout. I get behind the wheel of the car and I get a DUI.
Right.
And this is a critical point for me, because I get this DUI. I'm in so much anger, right? I'm in that victim mentality that I hate my husband. If life were better, I wouldn't have done this. And I go to bed and I'm like hating life. And then I wake up the next morning, and it's at that point where I'm like, I'm either going to lose everything in my life that I have built, my children and my husband, everything, or I'm going to have to admit that I have a problem.
Right.
And so I admitted to myself that I was an alcoholic. Went downstairs, sat my husband down, and I told him I'm an alcoholic. I start crying, and he could have gone two ways. He could have said, well, too bad, you're not, but he embraced me, and it was the first time I felt love. I mean, like, I'm here, I am looking for love all this time.
Right.
Right in front of me. And
yeah, keep going.
And now I felt like the weight of the world came off my shoulders. I don't have to lie anymore, because now I'm like drinking. I'm hiding my drinking, and I'm just in a horrible, horrible state. And so he literally drives me to AA that day. And
how did you guys even know where a meeting was or what AA was?
Well, because 3 months prior to that, I had gone to AA.
Right.
But I had convinced myself that I wasn't an alcoholic. I didn't have the same story that everyone was sharing. And
what had prompted you to go the first time? You just knew, kind of.
I just knew my drinking wasn't right. I wake up every night in the middle of the night thinking about my actions. I'm not going to do it again the next day. And I ultimately always did, And there's 5 steps to getting to addiction, right? I mean, people like, what's your rock bottom and all this, but there is a whole process that gets you to that place, right? You don't just wake up the next day and go, oh my God, I got a problem. It's pretty much, you realize it for quite some time. And I was trying to figure out all these ways not to do it without going to AA.
What are these 5 steps? I'm curious. I've never heard that before.
So, experimentation.
Right.
Continued use.
Uh-huh.
Then your buildup of a tolerance.
Uh-huh.
And then you have dependence. Your body is dependent on it.
Right.
And then you are full-blown addiction, where you are using the substance or continuing the behavior no matter the consequences in your life.
And how did you find that first meeting? The one that you went to before you got sober?
So not the one that
not the one that your husband drops you off at, but the one before that.
Very first one, like, I am just like the broken bird mom, that's in there with my head down, full of shame.
Yeah.
And fear. And I went to an all women's meeting, and I got through 3 months of sobriety. I got through a vacation without drinking.
This is before the episode in the mall.
Yes.
This is before the DUI. Right.
Yeah. So there's a year in between this.
Right.
So it was that year that I full on just destroyed my life.
And in the 3 months of sobriety, were you happier?
I was. Yeah. I was, but I also, it was at a different place. It was like, for me, I needed my rock bottom for me to move towards full surrender.
Yeah, sure.
I realized. And, maybe not everybody needs that, but I needed it.
Yeah. And so when you go in the second time, does it feel different immediately?
It does. It feels differently. So I had someone I could call that could help me.
Right.
So I went in with a woman that helped me. I wasn't alone again, like the first time I was alone. And
who was the woman? I mean, how did you know her? Just
I
from
had
your...
met her in the meetings
Right.
time before.
Right.
And it just, I don't know. It was just like, I just jumped in with both feet. And it was at that point, and maybe because I had done it before, I knew what I had to do, and I knew how I needed to surrender and start working and doing everything that I was told. And I wasn't ready to do everything I was told before.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you stay married to your husband?
Yep.
It's interesting. There was something
yeah.
you said, like, before in you were describing your mentality before the DUI, and you were like, I hated my husband. I resented him. I blamed him he was working all the time. Like, why did you feel so angry towards him? I'm only asking because I'm a husband who everyone's always angry at.
Well, for me, my anger, okay, there's a couple of things, and we ended up going through counseling. So because of my trauma and the abuse,
Right.
I needed so much more than my husband could give me emotionally.
Right. Sure.
Right.
That makes sense.
So he had his past where he didn't have the emotional connection with his father and all of this. So he didn't know how to give that to me.
Right.
And that's what I needed.
Right.
And he worked all the time. I was very lonely.
What kind of work does he do?
He's in television also.
Right.
So he's on the executive side of things, and so his job's very demanding.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so I guess, just to make sense of what you said beforehand, it's in the aftermath of your sobriety that you discover this guy has this studio space.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, I can help you find clients.
Right.
And that leads to you creating Coffee with Marci.
And then
how does that all feel as a sober person compared to the way it felt when you were drinking and putting yourself in basically in that same situation? Like, how is it different?
Well, because I had a different mindset. I loved myself. I didn't, another big thing is perfectionism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Always trying to be perfect. And I released that. I'm not perfect.
Right. I guess there's a big difference between like having perfect hair and makeup and showing up for an audition and just holding your FaceTime up and saying, I'm doing a fucking show and it's going to be what it's going to be. And we're going to have fun. And we're not going to worry about whether we make a fortune or become famous doing this. We're going to do it because it's fun, Fun
and fulfilling.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. It was fulfilling.
And so then how does that evolve into, sort of where you are now?
So I've had the show now, God, over 5 years.
Oh, how cool.
And
what's the show? It's called
Wake Up with Marci.
And what's sort of the format?
So the format is telling stories of triumph. A lot of it is about mental health, wellness, mind, body, soul.
Right. And do you interview people?
I interview people. I have celebrities on. I have educators on. I have authors on. I have people that can help us to change our lives. They educate us. They give us resources, action items, and also like telling stories, like how did you get through it, so we can spread hope and share ways, because we're all really facing the same types of experiences, whether it's divorce, financial decline, a mindset shifts that are needed in our lives, raising children, or then there's the mental health aspect of things and addiction and all of that.
And how often do you do the show?
I tape weekly and the
Right.
show airs on the weekends. Yeah.
Right.
So it's an edited format, live
Right.
to tape.
And you have a book out right now. I believe
I
that's how
have
we
a
were
book.
introduced to each other. What's the book called?
It's called Chaos to Clarity, Seeing the Signs and Breaking the Cycles. So
Yeah, so I was just going to say, is it more memoir or is it more
it's
self-help
a
or is it kind of
memoir. It's
both?
a
A
memoir
roadmap for
about,
healing?
yeah. So it's my story, and I have education weaved throughout the book to help others to identify trauma in their past and also to help them in their own healing journey by providing prompts and introspective work and action items. I share my experience through the 12-step program. And a lot of this is, yes, it's about recovery, but it's about getting to the source of the trauma and healing from that, and what I did to heal from that. And it's all about mindset for us to change.
Right. Yeah, because it was interesting. I was looking at, some of the press materials that I got sent, and I was one of the subheadings was overcoming a victim mentality. And I
Yes.
was sort of curious, like how do you do that? Like, I mean, I don't, obviously there's a whole book about it that you've written,
Yeah.
but like the thumbnail, like, I mean, it must be about mindset on some level.
Yeah. So one of the things that people do when they face trauma is they cope with a victim mindset.
Right.
And when you have a victim mentality, you think that you don't have a part in anything. You feel that other people are always wronging you.
Right.
You have no self-confidence or self-worth. And so these are things that I had to break free of and learn how to change, and me learning how to see my part in things and pause before reacting. And I was a very reactive person.
Right.
And just have empathy for others. And
Right.
so one of the things that I've learned through my journey is really like emotional intelligence. And that's a big part of the shifting from that victim mentality. And my husband evolved with me. This doesn't always happen in relationships.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
So I was very fortunate that my husband, we learned together and we grew together. And
That's
that's
so cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the people that raised you. Like, how did you ever get did you resolve things with your mom? How did things, is she still with us?
Yes, she's not still with us. She died 2 years ago. Unfortunately, my mother never won her battle against alcoholism, and it was a lot of years of a lot of painful years for myself and for her going to jail. I mean, her cycle was go to jail, go to a halfway house, go into rehab, leave the rehab, go, binging, get herself back into a rehab. And it just, as you can imagine, with this roller coaster ride, I'm on that roller coaster ride with her. I mean, I remember the first time, Passages in Malibu. She was actually living in California, and that was her first rehab. We did an intervention, and it just never took, because you can't make anyone get sober. I mean, you got to want to get sober. You have to. So she just had resentment towards her husband at the time. And it was a long, long battle. And there was, as much as I'm sad that my mother passed away, I'm happy for her because she's at a place of peace now and no longer has to struggle.
And what about your grandma? Did she
she's still with us?
She's still with us. That's amazing.
Yeah, she is.
Wow, how great. How old is she?
91. God love her.
And have you guys remained close?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. That's great. Is she still in Houston?
She is.
That's cool.
Yeah. I was like, one of the things I now also go on networks, ABC, NBC, all of the networks as a recovery expert.
Sure.
And my grandmother can't see me on TV. So like one of the things I wanted her to see me on TV. So in January, I'm going to be on CBS Morning News, and I'm going to be in studio. I'm going to go and visit. So she'll get to see me on TV.
That's so cool. And
Yeah.
and what about your dad? Did you?
So, oh gosh, my dad died on from a motorcycle accident when I was 20.
Oh, wow.
And
And were you guys in touch at that point? I mean, had you?
yeah, we tried to form a relationship. My father was very odd. And just I don't know, like I don't know if just every brain cell was dead. He didn't know how to have a daughter, right? I mean, like never around it. Ultimately, I mean, I had a lot of abandonment issues too, because I always wondered, why does my dad never call me? Well, I found out that he had asked my grandparents to raise me and take control of that because he knew his lifestyle was not good. I mean, I remember going to visit him. I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. He's living in an apartment above a motorcycle shop. He's watching Cheech and Chong and smoking pot. Like, I'm like, what is happening here?
Right. How can this be my father?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to his credit, he at least recognized his own inadequacy, and you did. I mean, sometimes when I look at like my own recovery or other people, you sort of I try to like look at these patterns and see like, why do some people get well and some people don't get well, and some people seem just like they try to get well and it just never happens, or and that like for wherever my life went astray, I always had this somewhere in the back, this sense that I was loved, whatever, however else my parents failed me, they did give me this like kernel of self-worth.
Yeah.
And this memory of love that I was able to, work my way back to at some point. And I don't know what validity there is in that or not, but I think it definitely is a helpful tool to have, that at least like you had the stability of your grandparents at some point along the way to kind of, and someone gave you that ambition. I don't know where that came from. I mean, do you think about that, like how you managed to?
I find it so interesting that I guess that I had to fend for myself and care for myself. And I just created this, as knocked down as I would get, I always managed to pick myself back up and had this drive inside of me. And I had a boss once at FX, and he said, Marci has this fire in the belly, and you can't teach the fire in the belly.
Right. Sure.
So, yeah. So I am grateful I had that, because otherwise I would have, God knows where I would have ended up.
Well, Marci, it's a really cool story. I really liked hearing it, and thanks so much for sitting down with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and it's always great to share your story and do this type of thing. So hopefully you reach somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.